Disclaimer, two things real quick. One, I was provided a review copy of this by Aksys Games, and two, while I am a fighting game enthusiast, I am not an expert. This is the first time I've ever reviewed a fighting game, and I apologize if I miss anything mechanic-wise. Under Night in Birth EXE Late was a PS3 port of the 2012 arcade game named Under Night in Birth. This gem of a fighter was developed by Ecole Software and French Bread, renowned for their cult classic Melty Blood series, and ported to consoles by Arc System Works, best known for BlazBlue, Guilty Gear, and the recent Dragon Ball FighterZ. When it came to the West in 2015, dedicated fans of anime fighters latched on to its interesting cast of characters, fluid animations, and fun, accessible gameplay. However, since it lacked a story and tutorial mode, which is pretty much a staple of anime fighter console ports, and was released extremely late into the PS3's life cycle, it never really got the chance it rightfully deserved. Now, that second chance has arrived, in the form of a new updated release, Under Night in Birth EXE Late Est, for PS4 physically and digitally, and PS3 and Vita digital only. The title is a bit of a mouthful, so for the sake of brevity, I will be referring to this game as either UNIEL, Under Night, or Latest. This version adds a 10-hour plus story, an incredibly in-depth tutorial mode, 4 new characters, and balance changes from the arcade version. With the influx of new players into the niche anime fighter subgenre thanks to FighterZ, I'm here to tell you why UNIEL is also worth your time. Or is it UNIELst? UNIEST? I don't know. Under Night at its core is a 4-button fighter. I'm going to quickly break down the basics you'll find in the tutorial. There's a lot more to this, so make sure to check out the full tutorial if you pick up the game, because it covers everything you could ever want to know and more. I will be referring to inputs based on their fight stick counterparts. In UNIEL's case, A means square, B means triangle, C means circle, and D means X. Let's start with movement. You can walk forward, walk backwards, and double tap to dash. Next is something called Assault, which is like a dashing arched hop. This is done with forward D. And finally, your aerial dash functions in the same fashion as an assault. Now let's go over combat. You have 3 attack buttons. A does your light attacks, B does your medium attacks, and C does your heavy attacks. It's worth noting for heavy attacks that you can actually hold down the button to increase the damage. All 3 attack types have crouching and aerial variants as well. Holding D charges up the grind grid meter at the bottom of the screen. This meter can also charge as the player is successful in combat, and decreases as your opponent is successful. When the circle meter in the center is filled, whoever has the most grid blocks will receive a combat buff until the round ends. You can also combine buttons. Simultaneously pressing A and D will throw the enemy in the direction you choose if they're in range. Pressing B and C will activate a character-specific move called a force function. These use up 1 grid block and knocks the enemy away. For beginners, this game features auto combos, which can be accessed by mashing A. These are great for experimentation and can help newcomers get used to the game's combat. Finally, if the player builds up the EXS meter to 100 or more, they can use something called a veil off by pressing all 4 buttons at the same time. In this mode, your EXS meter is constantly drained and will end once it's depleted. You can freely use EXS specials within the time limit and can now use deadly specials called infinite worths. If you have less than 30% of your HP, you can also activate an infinite worth EXS, which is essentially a character's ultimate move and can be used by hitting all 4 buttons again. Okay, now that all that's out of the way, let's talk about the feel of combat. UNIEL has always been one of those fighters that's easy to learn, but offers a lot of depth for those willing to put in the work. When I first picked up the original, I was just a novice, but even then, I fell in love with how smooth everything felt. In Latest, the animations are just as fluid, the sprites just as gorgeous, and the matches just as fast. The combat is as great as it was in the original, but has a ton of tiny improvements to make the overall experience better. Combos are still easy to pull off with your normals chaining together in fun ways. So if you like the insanely fun matches then, you'll be sure to like them even more now. All the characters have so much depth to them, with fun to execute commands that all look visually stunning. It would have been nice if the 16 original characters got an updated moveset, but unfortunately none of them did. From what I've played, matchmaking works well, and, unlike fighters, is extremely easy to just jump in and find a match. You can even play with your friends. What a concept. I still love you though, fighters, don't be mad. Also, you gain currency from fighting, and this can be used to unlock art, music, and color swaps for all your characters. If you had any complaints about a lack of content in the original game, Latest makes sure to address them. Speaking of new content, this brings me to the game's 4 new additions to the roster. I'll go over them real quick. Enkidu is an old man who only uses punches and kicks to fight. He's designed to be played up close and personal, and is best for people who prioritize footsies over combos. Basically, he's a Street Fighter character in UNIEL. Mika is a girl who wields giant gauntlets, and is able to dish out brutal damage and close distances quickly. Great for players who want to focus solely on smacking people around. Next there's Phonon, a zoning character with a whip that, honestly, I still can't figure out completely. Fair warning, she's distance-based. Not very beginner-friendly in my opinion, unless I'm just plain dumb. And finally, the best new character. Now don't tell anyone I told you this, because this is an insider secret, but apparently the devs decided that Eltnum needed some competition as best girl. So they introduced the Crimson Knight herself, Wagner. She's a speed-based rushdown character that does great at applying constant pressure, great design, great fighting style, pretty much everything you could ever want in a character. With the inclusion of these 4, that brings the roster up to a total of 20 characters. There is a lot of variety here, so there's a good chance that you'll find a couple that fit your playstyle. Like previously mentioned, the story mode has received a pretty hefty expansion. The original game only had an arcade mode, taking place during an event called the Hollow Knight, which only occurs once per month. During this time, monsters, known as voids, are able to roam free and only a few select humans have the ability to see them. Voids prey on what is known as existence, which is an energy source dormant in all matter, and target humans that awaken during the Hollow Knight. Humans that survive void attacks are referred to as in-births, and they basically get magic powers. The cast is made up of mostly in-births, and the arcade mode has you pick one of them and fight through 10 battles, with light bits of story sprinkled throughout. These were all interesting enough, but I'm sure you can see why people wanted more. French Bread's response to this is the new Chronicle mode, which is a prequel to the arcade mode story. These are all character specific and can be played at in any order. You start with 2, but unlock more as you complete them. This framing device was extremely well executed, but if you aren't a fan of visual novels, you might be left disappointed. I'm a big fan of VNs myself, but I still had some nitpicks with the presentation of Chronicle mode. You see, character portraits are limited to one pose, there aren't mouth animations, the text box is incredibly simplistic, and there aren't any dialogue choices or fights. So settle in and get the popcorn ready. All of these are minor complaints and are unlikely to completely ruin your enjoyment, but it would have been nice if a little more of their budget had went towards making these things look a little better. Also, at the time of recording, the localization has some small issues. They made a weird stylistic choice to use mainly the Japanese quotation marks in dialogue, despite English quotation marks also being used. On top of that, I noticed occasional typos, so I hope they release a patch to clean things up. The Japanese voice acting, on the other hand, is all wonderful, and while some of the stories can be a little slow, the writing itself is pretty engaging. When it comes to presentation, UNIEL nailed it. The art is as charming as it ever was, and brand new portraits were drawn for combat UI. There's a new beautifully animated opening, and even more incredible music tracks composed for this version. A well-composed soundtrack is one of the most important things to me, and I'm happy to say that UNIEL delivers in both its new and old tracks. The OST has a really nice dark vibe, with music going from electronic to rock to even jazz, depending on the game's mood. It's rare to see a fighting game soundtrack take this many risks, but composer Raito has done a fantastic job bringing the world to life with this vibrant OST. Under Night In-Birth EXE Latest is a must-play for not just fans of anime fighters, but anyone looking to get into the genre. Its gameplay is approachable and fast-paced, but with a high enough skill ceiling to keep people coming back. Its character designs and music are wonderful and exciting, but a couple weird design choices and a sometimes spotty localization can bring down the experience a bit. Now, despite my gripes, this is still one of the most complete fighting game experiences you can find on the market right now. With a 10-hour plus story mode, great combat, 20 diverse characters, and all of it for just $50. I give this game a solid recommendation, and a grade of a B+. Hey there, thanks for making it through the whole video, it really means a lot to me. If you like this review and you want to end up picking up the game, you can do so on February 9th. So we have people to thank, accounts to be plugged, and an announcement to be made. As usual, thank you to @SupremeZerker for being my wonderful script editor. The reason the dialogue sounds so good is because he's amazing. And @Ridiculous for helping me out with any terminology since, I've never reviewed a fighting game before. They're both wonderful, magnificent people, and you should follow both of them on Twitter. Once again, big thanks to Aksys Games for providing me with a review copy of this game. This was my first review code for the channel, which is a pretty big deal. If you enjoy the sound of my voice, you can follow me on Twitch at Dr. Cullen PhD. Come hang out, I stream regularly. If you want to stay updated on my stuff, why don't you follow me on Twitter at Dr. Cullen PhD? I announce stuff there, it's fun. Kind of like this announcement I'm going to drop right now. While I was editing this video, I actually received another review code from the wonderful people at Atlas. They sent me Radiant Historia Perfect Chronology, and you can expect a review for that by the end of the month. Maybe sooner, I don't know. Let's see how it goes. That'll be it for me. Hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. Boop.